Hey guys, it's the Stick Figure Historian. So we're jumping back into our England series here. Although really it's more of the England and Scotland series now, I guess. But anyway, Charles was rather upset when he heard what was going on in Scotland. He saw these followers of the National Covenant, Covenanters they called themselves, as rebels. If he wanted them to use the new prayer book, then they must. The king is in charge of the Kirk. So he thought, anyway. But it's easy to think something, and quite another to make it happen. But Charles certainly was going to try to make it happen. He raised an army, but with limited funds and without Parliament's help, it wasn't easy. It was a rather small army. He tried to supplement it by paying foreign troops to join them. Catholic foreign troops. You can imagine the uproar this caused among the Scots and many of the Protestants in England. It certainly looked like proof of their fears of a Catholic takeover. The king devised a triple line of attack. A fleet of ships would land on both the east and west coasts of Scotland, while a land force would charge over the southern border. Once again, easily thought, but not easily executed. The ships sailed to their destinations only to find that they could not make a landing. The Scots had taken every precaution and were guarding the ports. And things went pretty similarly with the landed army. They got to the border, but no further. Charles chickened out. From what he could see, the Covenanters had a much larger army than he, and were altogether better prepared for a fight. Now, in his first assumption, the king was only partly right. The Scots did have more men, but not that many more compared to the English. Charles had about 15,000 soldiers, while Alexander Leslie, the Covenanter general... yeah, that's, not funny. While Alexander Leslie, the Covenanter general, had around 16,500. In his second assumption, though, Charles was entirely accurate. His men, generals and troops alike, were largely inexperienced, and a lot of them had come only reluctantly to fight. On the other hand, many of the Covenanters were veterans of the 30 Years' War, and they were here to fight with all their hearts, for in their eyes, both their church and their country were at stake. And thus it was that the pacification of Berwick was signed. But though pacification, meaning peace, was in the title, that's not really what it was. More accurately, it should have been called the Truce of Berwick, for it was only a pause in the war. Charles still wanted to crush the Covenanters. He was just trying to buy time to raise a greater force. For the first time in 11 years, Parliament was called. Charles even offered to give up ship money entirely if they would just help him get funding for the upcoming war. The king was desperate, and the House of Commons knew it. The answer was a flat no. They weren't going to settle on merely abolishing ship money here when they could easily drag out other concessions from the troubled king. A whole list of grievances was laid before Charles, and he was going to fix them before there was any talk of money. As you might have guessed, this ruffled the king's temper a bit. Well, more than a bit, actually. After sitting for only 3 weeks, the short parliament, as it came to be known, was shut down. Charles the Stubborn was going to do things his own way again. But the Covenanters weren't going to give him a chance to regroup. They got together in their parliament, for Scotland had their own separate parliament at this time, and declared that they would rule themselves. And not only this, but they turned the tables and launched an invasion of England. Alexander Leslie and his army poured down almost entirely unresisted into Northumberland, which Northumberland is the little red section there that's highlighted. They finally met a sizable English army at Newburn, but this they utterly defeated, and passing by took the town of Newcastle. Things were not looking good for Charles. This open rebellion was bad, yes, and the defeat was disgraceful, to be sure, But what made matters even worse was the town the Scots were holding. Newcastle was London's chief coal supplier, and hence the Treaty of Ripon was made. As part of the terms, the Covenanters would be paid £850 per day, and Charles would pay back everything that the Covenanters had spent during the short war. In return, the Scots would stop fighting, but they could still keep the territory they had taken until the full payment was made to them and a final peace treaty was drawn up. It was a sour deal for the king, but he had no other choice. And one predicament led to another, for we know he had no money with which to keep his end of the bargain. Unless he was going to face the facts, humble himself, and listen to Parliament.